civil. Hey, what's happening? How you doing?
Hey, doing good. Heard you talking about China a little bit, and I think I have some disagreements.
Okay.
So one thing, their economy isn't actually growing. China does very strange things to inflate their GDP numbers, and a lot of it has to do with corruption. Since the very beginning of the Chinese Communist Party, especially under Mao Zedong, they have really, really tried to basically make as much money for the party as possible.
Okay. Well, I'm going to
And
stop you right there. Right. So I just want to talk about the first thing you just said there. You said their economy is not really growing. Now, you do realize right before the pandemic, the global tourism industry was having a boom because thousands and thousands of people who had never been going on vacation internationally were going on vacation. You do realize there's like whole sections of Tibet that have just gotten electrified. You do realize that there's big chunks of the country that are getting paved roads for the first time. I mean, that's not happening. That's all
well,
just
that's Tibet.
propaganda. They're all just living in starving conditions. They haven't lifted 800 million people from poverty.
Well, that's Tibet, not technically China.
Well, Tibet is
Um,
part of China.
well, yeah, China would say that.
Well, no, Tibetans would say that too. They were the most enthusiastic supporters of the revolution. Have you ever read When the Slaves Rose Up in Tibet by Anna Louise Strong? Have you read what was written by the great African American scholar W.E.B. Du Bois? I mean, the atrocities committed against Tibetan monks were carried out by Tibetans who were rising up from serfdom. They were the ones doing it because it was Tibetan feudalism that was propped up by the Buddhist, monks. That was what was oppressing them.
I'm
So
I'm familiar with some of the atrocities with Tibetan feudalism and what's his name, the child kisser.
right, right.
He's him and his whole class are absolute scumbags, and basically it's a whole racket to just steal money from people. I'm aware of that, but you're kind of getting into like weird issues when you consider Tibet to technically be part of China. I know China does own Tibet at this point, but it's kind of like saying the British Empire's wealth is increasing because Rhodesia is increasing in economic
Yeah, well,
prosperity.
okay. Do you know the history of what the British colonizers did in Africa? Like, I mean, you know that whole history of, I mean, you look at what the British Empire did to Africa, and you're seriously going to compare that to what China did in Tibet?
Well, it's not that I'm comparing the two. It's just that I'm saying the point that just because Tibet is increasing in economic prosperity, that doesn't mean China is increasing in economic prosperity. You can
Well,
say that of Tibet, but
but
to
Tibet
say that
is
of
part of
China,
China. I mean, just look at a map. I mean, it's the Tibet
well,
Autonomous
again,
Region. It's just,
well,
we have,
again,
North Dakota is part of America. Tibet is part of China.
right, but like again, it's kind of like saying, well, like Britain is increasing in economic prosperity because Rhodesia has increased economic
Yeah, but
prosperity.
Rhodesia is
Like
on
it
the other
was a
side of the
British
planet. It would be
colony.
like saying Scotland is
Well,
increasing in
it
economic
doesn't.
prosperity because Scotland is in Britain and Tibet is
Well,
in
it's the
China.
same point. Like it's a territory that was owned by the British. So you're
Yeah, but it's
kind
on
of
the other
getting
side of the planet. It was seized in brutal
yeah.
colonialism, whereas
Well, sure.
China, one China is something that goes back for thousands of years. I mean, there has
Well,
been,
sure.
and the only
Even
reason that it was divided was because of the British and because of colonialism. I mean, and I mean, Hong Kong is part of China, Taiwan is part of China, the Uyghur
sure.
regions are part of China. There's one China. I just, I mean, I think that's U.S. government policy.
Well, sure, but even ignoring that, that's only like one territory.
Okay,
So
but I mean, I'm
like
talking
you can
about. I mean, it's
have
not just Tibet; it's the Uyghur regions. It's all over the country. Millions of people have been lifted up from poverty. I mean, they have
well,
been raising. I mean, we're talking
I
hundreds
don't
of millions
disagree.
of people here.
I
Yeah.
don't disagree with that assessment of Tibet,
So how
but
can you say they're
I
not
think
growing
you'd
then? Your premise is that they're not
well,
growing,
here's
and
the thing. I think you'd agree with me on this. I think there is a problem in most Western developed nations. United States is one of the more egregious cases. The UK is particularly bad. We have a situation where there's not actually much real economic productivity. And you're seeing these kind of games played where wealth is being taken out of the middle class and it's being funneled up to the rich. Property values are probably the best example of this, especially in the UK. They're not really building many new houses. There's not much new construction going on. There's not much like more employment. There's not any actual productive economic activity, but they've rigged a system in a way where there's like a speculator market, and
Right.
that's being counted into some of these GDP figures. But the only people who are actually benefiting from it are the ultra wealthy. So
Okay.
you can see GDP go up, but no one's really actually benefiting from it.
Yeah, life
So
expectancy
you can,
is
yeah.
going down,
So
et cetera. Yeah, I'm with you on that much, but I think we're seeing the opposite in China. Life expectancy is going up. I mean,
that's,
and
well, by the
yeah.
way, life expectancy in China and Russia and all these communist countries have gone up after they moved away from communism.
No, actually, in the 90s, Russia's life expectancy significantly dropped, and things only got better in the 90s when Putin put oil and gas under state ownership and re-centralized the economy. The 90s in Russia, go read The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein.
Yeah, that was, yeah. So right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, life expectancy skyrocketed.
That's a lot. That is not true at all, my friend. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a huge plummet. I mean, the suicide rate went through the roof. Mass poverty was everywhere. They lost 10% of their population, either left the country or died. Andre Gunder Frank, the U.S. economist, he called it economic genocide. I mean, that is not true at all. I mean, that is the fall of the Soviet Union was devastating. And in fact, even the anti-communists argue that. They just blame it on the communists. They say, well, somehow the fall of communism was the communists' fault. But no, you are just way off on that point, my friend. I mean, no, the fall of the Soviet Union was an absolute economic disaster. I mean, just ask any economist. There's BBC documentaries you can watch, etc. That's just simply not the case. I mean, where did you get that from?
I'm pretty sure that was from World Health Organization.
The World Health Organization talks about what a disaster it was that their healthcare system fell apart. I mean, like something like 90,000 factories closed down. You had mass unemployment at a point you'd never had. The drug, crisis in the country exploded. The suicide rate went through the roof. I mean, the 90s, even in like your standard anti-Putin documentary, they acknowledge this. They say the reason Putin came to power was to fix the disaster during the Yeltsin years. I mean, it was just devastating what happened to the country. So you're just way off on that point. That's what we're all taught, though, and that's what I was taught. See, that's why I got into all of this to begin with, because I was taught communism just failed everywhere it's ever been tried, and then I learned a 3-year
period. There was a
I'm talking about a 10-year period. I'm talking about from 1991, and then you had 1993, you had Black September, and then you had 1996, you had the election that the U.S. government, basically rigged for Boris Yeltsin, and it wasn't really until 1999 that things started to improve with Putin, and he wasn't really able to start really dramatically fixing it until the oil prices went up in 2003, because he had centered it around Gazprom and Rosneft. But yeah, there was 10 years of what they called economic genocide.
Regardless, it was kind of off topic to the point I was making. I'll just concede that point.
There's somebody else behind you, so make your point quickly. But
yeah, sure. So you can have increased economic prosperity within certain regions of a country or within certain economic classes. That doesn't actually mean the wealth of the overall country is improving. That's basically what's happening in China.
Well, actually, it's not. Even the most rural areas are getting roads paved. They're paving roads in the most rural parts of China. They're unpaving roads across America. So, I mean, that's actually in America, we're seeing, the heartland is just coming apart, and, we're basically fleeing to the coasts. I'm from Ohio. I fled to New York City to find economic prosperity. Most of the people I went to school with, they've done that because there's nothing left in the Midwest. That's America you're describing, right? But in China, it's these rural areas that are building and constructing and getting electrified. And that's just not accurate.
There's a lot to say about that. For one thing, a lot of these construction projects in China are below their own codes. There was an earthquake that happened, in like the mid 2000s, something like 80,000 people died. And it's because
according to who?
Sorry?
According to who? I mean, who gave that number? Is that a Chinese
That
government number? Is that just
yeah,
what
I'm pretty
some
sure.
anti-China
I
blog said? Or, you know, I
no.
mean, it's because there's a lot of stuff. I mean, they told us the Uyghurs were all being rounded up and put in death camps, and it was the Holocaust, and that turned out not to be true. You know, I mean, there's just a
Well,
lot of disinformation. There's an anti-China industry. The Falun Gong, Epoch Times, they just make stuff up. You know, they're harvesting their organs. They've
okay.
said they've looked into
Well,
that a million times.
do you
You know,
believe the Tiananmen Square massacre happened?
I believe there was a lot of death that happened during 1989 during those events, but there was shooting
Okay.
on both sides. There were hundreds of Chinese soldiers that were killed also. You know, and it was an awful
Okay.
event that, you know, but it was an attempted color revolution, and the students dispersed peacefully, and outside the square there was an episode of blood and killing that was very ugly that went on for a couple weeks. You know, and there were sections of the Chinese military that were fighting other sections of the Chinese military. It was awful, but
Oh,
you know, there wasn't a color revolution. So, you
okay,
know,
but
but
the point I'm making is, like, when you look at some of these infrastructure projects, I will agree China has put in more effort into producing more public infrastructure, but the actual usefulness and safety of that infrastructure is very questionable. And there's a lot of corruption within the Chinese Communist Party. Recently, they've tried to root out that corruption. They're actually committing killings. They're like killing some heads of state because
yeah, they've been
they're like,
using it's an anti-corruption campaign with Xi Jinping.
yeah.
With you know, with the
They're also doing that
mastermind
within the
campaign. But listen,
military.
Garland's next, but it's been good, so I'm gonna bring Garland on. But thanks. All right.